Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Loreena McKennitt, and I'm speaking as the founder of the Wise Communities organization, who's responsible for mounting this rally. To begin, I would like to express our First Nations land acknowledgement. It is a great privilege to share this beautiful territory, which has been the site of human activity for many thousands of years. This territory is governed by two treaties. The first is the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant of 1701, made between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and an agreement to set violence aside and peacefully share and care for the land in the Great Lake basins. The second is the Huron-Tract Treaty of 1827, an agreement made by 18 Anishinaabe chiefs and the Canada Company, an agency of the British Crown. As individuals, we are in a process of learning how we can be better treaty partners. We wish to honor the ancestral gardens of this land and its waterways, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Neutrals. Today, many Indigenous peoples continue to call this land home and act as its stewards. And this responsibility extends to all peoples, to share and care for this land for generations to come. Today, most of you will be watching from home as the COVID regulations are more restrictive than they were when we last met here on December 21st. For this rally, we have only planned for about 10 people to be in the square, and who are mostly crew, and it is quite likely with a further lockdown looming, we will not be able to meet here at all until this matter is resolved or the lockdown is lifted. This is as it should be, as public safety must take a priority. Yet, we will continue to review our options and how we will stay connected in the coming days. In a rally before the holiday break, we heard from one of our local youth, Quentin Whitaker. And today, we will have, although remotely, have the voice of another youth, Effie Honeywell. I've also invited Anne Carbert from Climate Momentum to give us an update, and we'll have a brief update from Concerned Stratford. I will conclude today's rally with my own thoughts, which will be in the form of a presentation directly delivered to the mayor councillors as they have been invited to observe this rally, either live or later at their convenience. It is hard to say exactly where we are at this process. It seems like a very long time ago, since October 29th, when the community was initially and formally alerted to the prospect of this glass factory. And yet, we know there may be many miles ahead of us still, and in the most challenging of circumstances, a global pandemic. And yet, success on this, in whatever way it looks like, will depend on our stamina, with whatever tools and capacities we have available to us. Today, as I see this square full of shoes and boots, your shoes and boots, it is a visible testimony to your devotion to this matter and our willingness to stay the course. At the same time, and no matter how long this might continue on for, I will ask this, that all our communications and efforts are respectful to each other, and particularly to the mayor and council. We must remind ourselves that under these circumstances, we don't know everything, and we may never know everything, and that there often is more than meets the eye. And that it is imperative that we hold ourselves to a very high standard of conduct, not to make things personal, not to doorstep the mayor with lawyers' questions in Zoom meetings, or to carpet bomb councillors' email bins with template missives to the extent it overwhelms them and they are frozen with despair. Let us be as informed and thoughtful as much as we can be. Write them your own thoughts, but treat the councillors with the respect that we would want to be treated were we in their shoes. There's nothing wrong with a robust debate, but it must be respectful and civil. I would also invite you to consider abandoning social media as a venue to discuss this subject. It is seldom now a respectful, accountable forum and cultivates a polarization of opinion, which when taken to the worst, as we saw in the US last week, it has the capacity to radicalize a large section of our population. It is often a pulpit for slander and bullying and has no place in a thoughtful and yet challenging civic discussion. Ask the councillors going forward, what is the means of communication that they find most helpful, and then do that. But please, do not make your comments personal. Speak to the person in the office. So now to get us started, I would like to ask Mike Sullivan from Concerned Stratford to give us a brief update on their efforts.
Thank you, Loreena. It's really kind of weird looking out here and seeing only a handful of people in a lot of shoes. But I think Loreena has managed to do in COVID times what nobody else can do, and that's show just how many people are really concerned about this thing. And it's a great graphic representation of you, the people of Stratford and around Stratford, who are as upset about this process and upset about the plans as we in Concerned Stratford are. By now, many of you will have received our mailer with a picture of the smiling mayor on the front, asking him to say no to Xin Yi. On the back are the telephone numbers and email addresses of all the councillors and the member of provincial parliament and the member of parliament, so that you can write to them respectfully, as Loreena has suggested, expressing your concerns about this project, your concerns about the process that was used to get us here. Also in this flyer is a photograph of just how big this project is compared to the rest of Stratford. It is enormous. And it isn't until you see it from the sky that you realize this will redefine Stratford. This project will make Stratford into an industrial city rather than an arts and culture city. And while that may be what Stratford wants, don't you think we should have public debate, that we should have lots of public debate, and that the public should be more involved than the council has allowed it to be up to this point? There is no way this kind of decision should be made in secret, behind closed doors, by a group of individuals who are not the entire city of Stratford. So we are urging council and the mayor to say no and let the people of Stratford decide whether or not this is the kind of Stratford they want to continue with. We have continued our due diligence, and I say our due diligence because we don't believe the council has been doing the diligence that is necessary to determine exactly what this project means. We have discovered that the true ownership structure of Xin Yi is a bunch of hidden companies in the British Virgin Islands. If there is a problem in the future that we need somebody to come and pay to clean this place up, who do we go for? We will not be able to get at anybody in the British Virgin Islands or in the Cayman Islands. So it will be up to the city of Stratford to pay to clean this up. We also note that through a letter to the editor of the local paper and a couple of other papers, we have learned that Xin Yi has given up on the dormitory. They are not going to build it, according to that letter signed by Tommy Wong and Mr. Pigeon, who appears now to be an employee of Xinyi rather than the president of GSP Group. That's a welcome development, though it certainly is too little and too late. But it shows that the power of the people actually means something to these individuals. I refer to this letter with some sense of sadness because the letter was used to attack me personally and to suggest that I was using racist analogies and xenophobia. And nothing could be further from the truth. Those of you who attended our first Zoom meeting know that we asked Winnie Ng, who is a respected former person from Hong Kong, and now the leader of democracy in Hong Kong, to speak on the very issues that Xinyi's letter touched on, so that we would be certain that we would not be acting in a way that is anti-Chinese or is somehow xenophobic. In fact, the quote in the letter to the editor was never said by us. And where they got it, I don't know. We'll be responding in due course, but this is not about the fact that this is a Chinese company. This is about the fact that we are concerned about the protection of workers. We are concerned about the size and scope of this. We are concerned about the environment. And to date, Xinyi has never, ever answered the city's question, just how much greenhouse gases will this emit? They said they did, but they didn't. You can read the city website for yourself. This will be it will make Stratford's greenhouse gas emissions more than double with just one factory. And the other thing we discovered in our examination of the documents is this is just one factory. There is another one planned on the same site with its own smokestack, with its own emissions, with its own water use, none of which has been disclosed in any of the documentation from Xinyi, from the city, or from the consultants. So be careful, Stratford. Be careful, mayor and councillors. We need to be very, very careful that we don't destroy what Stratford already is. And the people of Stratford deserve a say in how this goes forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mike. As so many of you have shared with me, the matter of this glass factory is not just about us or our generation, but part of a path of looking forward and the legacy which will be left to the next generation. It is on this basis that I felt that our youth must continue to have a voice in these rallies, and if nothing else, learn along with us the process of advocating for one's society and one's community. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you via video link, Effie Honeywell.
Whenever someone asks me where I'm from, I am proud to say I'm from Stratford. It's picturesque, community-minded, immersed in the arts, and recognizes that the climate must be a top priority. However, when I think about this glass plant, it takes away from every single aspect of Stratford I and many of the citizens and regular visitors love. A 100-meter smokestack is not picturesque. A lack of community involvement and trust in planning is not community-minded. Toxic heavy machinery minutes away from that downtown core is not conducive. And a plant that pumps 2 times the amount of greenhouse gases as Stratford produces does not signify that Stratford thinks of the climate as a top priority, even though we declared a climate emergency, meaning that climate emergency was a lie. We do not stand for lies and mistrust in Stratford. After I graduate from post-secondary education and move into a career, I'm going to have a choice as to where I want to live. Why would I come back to a town that does not value the public's opinion or even tells the truth? Why would I come back to a town that doesn't see the climate crisis that we are in? Why would I come back to a town with a 100-meter smokestack? Why would I come back to a town with Jingy?
Thank you, Effie. Your words are very important to us and important to be heard, and thank you for taking the time to share them with us. I'd like now to invite Ann Carbert from Climate Momentum to update us on where that organization is at. We know that Climate Momentum and the whole climate emergency plan were high priorities before the glass factory matter distracted us from their progress. Acknowledging that there are still some serious outstanding environmental concerns within the glass factory project itself. The Climate Emergency Declaration, which this city signed almost a year ago, must now and in the future be an unbreachable benchmark in terms of considering any future development. I, amongst many others, are eager to learn and stay connected with your work and how it informs future industrial development in the city. And would you please offer us your remarks today?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. What I would like to do is actually make a connection between this campaign and the wider climate action campaign that I hope more people will become involved in. Thank you. Along with volunteers over the last 2 years, I have been involved in creating a network of climate-concerned citizens in the Stratford area. Climate Momentum is what emerged, a local connection network and a climate information source with a blog and social media accounts and some events as well. Our connections support youth climate activists locally and also support and share the work of the Perth County Climate Change Coordinator. If you haven't already, I invite you to take a look at our website, climatemomentum.ca, sign up for our e-newsletter there, and follow Climate Momentum on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where I promise we have positive climate-related and community-related posts. The campaign against the proposed Jingy development that has been spearheaded by Get Concerned Stratford and Wise Communities is an excellent example of how citizens can come together to get more informed, raise awareness, and advocate. But with all the many climate initiatives we need to get moving right now, I would much rather we were able to channel that energy into creating what we want instead of fighting against what we don't want. But here we are. The reality is that we have very limited time to respond to the climate emergency. Earlier responses have not been effective at all, and greenhouse gas emissions keep increasing. By 2030, just 9 years away, we must reduce emissions by about 50%. That means planning and action in all communities and at all levels of government must start now. At the same time as the community discussion and debate about the Jingy glass development continues, a draft climate action plan is expected to be presented to City Council very soon. Advocacy on both issues must happen at the same time. And in this situation, I see opportunities, and I also see risks for us committing to bold and effective climate action in Stratford. First, the opportunities. It is excellent that we are demanding details about the estimated greenhouse gas emissions from the Jingy factory, and that we are talking about greenhouse gases as much as we are. That is a good thing. If we can learn more about emissions counts and talk about the primary sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Stratford, we will be better informed about the impact of this proposed development and better prepared to take steps to reduce local emissions from transportation, buildings, and waste. The second opportunity I see is the fact that we're also talking about the Climate Emergency Declaration. We're talking about that a lot now. With this discussion, we will remind ourselves and inform others that this is a real emergency. If you're my age or older, you might have followed the news of the Kyoto Accord many years ago or other international climate agreements and believed those efforts were working to address the problem of climate change. But that is unfortunately not the case. Instead of 30 years of gradual greenhouse gas emissions reductions, we've had 30 years with emissions dramatically increasing the carbon in our atmosphere, including in the 5 years since the Paris Agreement in 2015. We have lost the chance for incremental response. We've left it very late to act and must now be bold and ambitious. When we talk about the climate emergency declaration and the climate emergency, we can talk about the fact that climate change is happening now. Locally, we can expect more heat waves and very hot days, and less predictable weather for growing our food. Around the world, tropical countries are being hit with storm cycles like they've never seen before. And up north, the Inuit are losing their houses and their land and their way of life as the permafrost melts. The people who are suffering the most from the current impacts of climate change have had very little to do with creating the problem. So as we remind everyone that Stratford Council declared a climate emergency, there is an opportunity to talk more about the reality of the climate crisis, to raise awareness of the impacts, and learn more about how the climate crisis connects with the inequality crisis that is now so glaringly apparent in this pandemic. Climate scientists and advocates around the world say that one of the most effective things we can do to combat climate change is talk about it. I see an opportunity in this moment. We can all become climate action champions now as we learn more about greenhouse gas emissions and the need to take the climate emergency seriously. The conversations we're having are important and timely. But as we get ready to approve a climate action plan for Stratford, I see a couple of big risks to this opportunity for climate awareness and advocacy. They come from the fact that we must fight against the Gini development at the same time that we must fight for urgent, effective climate action. One risk is that we focus on the work to delay and hopefully stop the Gini plant and then run out of steam and stamina. We must remember that stopping the massive Gini plant and its emissions is not enough. I believe that as a community, we must not only aim to keep Stratford as green as it is, but to make it much greener. A transition away from our fossil fuel economy is coming, and Stratford could choose to lead. We could set a target to be a carbon neutral community before 2050 and build on the solutions already in motion here and in neighboring communities. The other risk I see in fighting the Gini plant at the same time as the draft climate plan comes forward is cynicism. Cynicism about council and city staff and their commitment to climate action in our community. It's so easy to see the contradiction in proposing to build a massive natural gas-powered factory while asking citizens to support a climate plan. So in response to this challenge and the risk of cynicism, I ask you to share what you're for as much as what you're against, and ask councillors to share their ideas for climate action too. As the Gini debate goes on, and we talk about greenhouse gas emissions and the climate emergency, we must imagine and plan the transformation that we want to see happen. We can build a vision for a dramatic and positive transition that restructures our economy and society. Let's commit to Stratford's first significant steps in that transition when the climate plan comes forward. It is challenging, but it also has amazing potential. Potential to respond to the climate crisis and the inequality crisis, to strengthen democracy, to combat racism and poverty, to build community, and to leave a promising foundation for today's children. As one climate writer puts it, you were born at exactly the right time to change everything. I believe that's what we must do right now, and I believe we can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much, Anne. I think those are exactly the words we need to hear. This is not just about this glass plant. There's actually a much bigger issue that is looming all around us. So I'd now like to offer my remarks of where I think we're at. And I would like to do that by addressing the mayor and councillors directly, some of whom who may be watching now or sometime after this rally. I'm choosing to do it this way because I think we're entering a phase where decisions of some kind will soon be made. And we will not necessarily know exactly what that path of decision-making might look like, or exactly when it will take place. So now, I will address the Mayor and Council. Good afternoon, Mayor Matheson and councillors. First of all, let me add my voice of thanks and gratitude for your service to this community. I know this has been a particularly difficult time for you, as you've received a great deal of feedback from this community concerning the Shinyi Glass Factory. And we well know this is not the only matter you're attending on our citizens' behalf. I'm also grateful that we all had a break from this over the holidays. And yet, I sense the time will be drawing near for you to be making some kind of decision concerning this matter. I want to assure you that by my speaking to you so directly today, it is not out of disrespect or that I in any way know more than you. I'm just seeking to ensure that you know no less. I, along with others, have had the opportunity to sit down with the mayor on a few occasions to try to develop a deeper understanding for this project and why certain decisions have been made in the way and the time they have. My meeting last Friday with the mayor is something I would like to share a bit of with you. I would say it was a very difficult yet positive meeting and ranged across many themes. It began by discussing the importance of foreign investment, the necessity of diversification of industries which can build strength and resilience for a community like ours. We talked about improving the nature of the specifications of industries who might be invited to come to our city and how they might be complementary to the existing ones, aligned to the image, priorities, and values of the residents. We talked about how important it was to ensure that all voices in the community were being considered and heard, including those who saw things in this proposal that were favorable to them and their needs. We talked about how important it was to conduct our communications with respect and how communications along various lines could be strengthened. We talked about the role of the provincial and federal governments in this project and their involvement from the very beginning. We reviewed a somewhat detailed timeline, which I and my colleagues have been assembling, which illustrates how invisible the project moved along, not meeting citizens' expectations, and highlighting that it was this lack of transparency and democratic process which has caused such alarm, impassioned feelings, and the loss of trust with our elected officials. This timeline will be available on the WISE Communities website after this rally. We talked about other contributing factors to a loss of trust, including how conflict of interest is dealt with at council. Not all of this was comfortable for either myself or the mayor, and yet we mustered on. We talked about the need of citizens to become more civically conversant, and I echoed that, as my own education was so sorely lacking in that regard, daily wishing that civics was a stronger priority in the education system. We talked about the 2 integrity commissioners' reports, which I have seen and which clear him of any misconduct. Most significantly and importantly, we talked about how to improve the process going forward, and that journey has now begun. I believe very shortly you will be asked to make another very important decision. That even though you have already received a great deal of information and feedback from all directions, it remains quite apparent that there is still a great deal of information outstanding. What information has been received has not been verified or examined by unbiased third-party analysis, but appears to be an act of marketing and/or propaganda, whether it be about greenhouse gas emissions, jobs, salaries, working conditions, and more. Two, we are aware that there is still some important due diligence to be done and reviewed, particularly with respect to current China-Canada relations. With this in mind, and in an email that will be sent this morning to you, you will find an excerpt from a book called Insidious Power: How China Undermines Global Democracy, and another excerpt from a book called Reset: Reclaiming the Internet for Civil Society, both which speak to the attention which needs to be borne in mind when considering a project like this glass plant. I will send in this email a profile also of the Xinyi corporate structure, in the event that you're not aware of it. I know you will receive some other communications on the theme. I just wanted to ensure you had universal access to this particular material. Another area which deserves more due diligence is that concerning the First Nations communities. It is true that during the annexation phase of the property in January of last year, that an initial duty to consult was undertaken with respect to 10 First Nations communities. However, this was on the understanding that this annexation was simply to gather more property for some undetermined future industrial use, and was thus examined purely on an archaeological basis. They, like the neighbors, were left in the dark about the true purpose of that annexation, and this is seen in the most strikingly in the timeline document between the dates December 19th, 2019 and February 6th, 2020. Given all that we know about the environmental concerns regarding this proposed factory, including greenhouse emissions and water consumption, it would be a dishonorable thing not to undertake a fresh duty to consult with all the First Nations communities who could be affected by the factory and its operations and what are implicated in it. And yet, as long as there continues to be information outstanding, like the rest of us, we can hardly ask them in good faith to draw upon their scarce resources of time and people, as they too are struggling to contain this pandemic, only to develop a premature position while so much information is incomplete and unavailable. Therefore, our duty is one of diligence first and decisions second. Now and in the future, we are respectfully demanding a process that would embody the highest standards and best practices of transparency and democratic involvement. This would see a company furnish you and the citizens of this community with a complete and final set of documents and information, after which there would be a thorough examination of all aspects, sometimes with third-party experts, and before your and the citizens' eyes, before you would be expected to confirm or deny any proposal. So at this time, I want to impress upon you how premature any affirmative vote would be. The only logical, reasonable, and responsible step is to dismiss this project. Should it appear again, it will be obliged to be put through a stronger and more accountable process, which we have begun to put in place and which we can all believe in. Then, and only then, can the path toward rebuilding our trust truly begin. Although we as citizens may never know the full account of what has led us to this point, I want to believe and need to believe that we're all working towards what we believe to be the best interests of our community and our neighbors, be they our counties or with our First Nations people. In closing, I would like to thank everyone again for their ongoing contributions to protecting the integrity of our community, the environment, and our democracy. As the masthead of the Washington Post reads, "Democracy dies in darkness, and so much collective effort has brought light to this situation." And as citizens of this community and across this land, we value democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and defending it begins at home. Thank you.